Imagine a world where the United States never came to be. The American Revolution failed, and the 13 colonies remained under British rule. Would monarchy still dominate global politics? Would democracy remain an unfulfilled ideal, overshadowed by imperial power? This is the story of how a determined group of farmers, shopkeepers, and revolutionaries defied the most powerful empire of their time and won. But was their victory inevitable, or was it a near impossible gamble? How did a fledgling rebellion with no formal army, economy, or global influence defeat the British war machine? What secret alliances and unexpected twists altered the course of history? And how did this fragile new nation, born out of resistance, set itself on the path to becoming a global superpower? In the late 18th century, the American colonies were at a crossroads. To the British Crown, they were a distant economic outpost, blessed with resources but subject to the empire's control. But to the colonists, these lands were something more than a source of riches. They were a promise of freedom, self-rule, and a future beyond the king's grasp. But that future seemed impossible. The British controlled the world's most powerful military, an empire that stretched across continents, and a stranglehold on commerce that made the colonies beholden. But what Britain did not expect was resistance. Resistance that would start not with armies but with ideas. Taxation without representation. That was the slogan that was shouted in the streets. The Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, the heavy hand of a government ruling from over the ocean, each law drove the colonists closer to rebellion. And then came the event that altered the course of history. 1770, Boston. British soldiers fired on an unarmed mob. 5 men were killed. The Boston Massacre was not just blood on the streets, it was a warning. The people had experienced tyranny, and they would not tolerate it. Rebellion was now a matter of when, not if. April 19, 1775. The first shots are fired in Lexington and Concord. Nobody realizes it yet, but the world has just been irrevocably altered. The American colonies, 13 disparate lands with no army to speak of, no official government, and no experience battling a world superpower, have just issued a declaration of war against the greatest empire in the world. To Britain, this is a mere rebellion, one that will be put down quickly. But to revolutionaries, this is a struggle to survive. From the start, the odds were stacked against them. The British possessed a professional army, an unrivaled navy, and resources from colonies worldwide. The Americans, farmers, blacksmiths, and merchants, many without formal training, were equipped with muskets and an abiding passion for freedom. The chances of success seemed remote. At Valley Forge, the resolve of the revolutionaries would be tested as never before. Freezing weather, hunger, illness, thousands of men perished without ever firing a shot. But out of this misery came something great. Under George Washington's command and the instructions of European officers such as Baron von Steuben, these men were reshaped from ragtag militias to a well-drilled military unit. And then, a turning point. France joins the war, taking not just their navy, but also weapons, funds, and soldiers. With the help of the French, the tide of power turns drastically. But was French assistance the sole cause of America's triumph? Or was something greater still involved? A strong, unwavering conviction in the cause of freedom. A conviction that brought the colonies together despite everything and made them more than a mere band of rebels. Would such a conviction prove sufficient to outweigh the odds and bring victory to the revolutionaries? In 1783, after 8 years of bloody war, the unthinkable had occurred. The United States had triumphed. The Treaty of Paris was signed, and Great Britain, the mighty empire of the day, acknowledged the sovereignty of 13 former colonies. But victory in war was only the start. Now, a much more daunting task beckoned. A nation had to be constructed from scratch. The vision of a unified democratic republic was tenuous, and the fate of the United States was uncertain. The newly created United States wobbled on the brink of failure for years. The Articles of Confederation, the initial government effort, were inadequate. States behaved like sovereign nations. The economy was in disarray, and with no central power, the young nation was at risk. Some doubted America would last a decade. Others, including George Washington, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton, felt the only solution was a stronger, more unified government. Their solution? The U.S. Constitution is a document created to provide a balance of power, establish a federal government, and unify the disparate states. But they didn't all see it that way. Furious arguments broke out between the anti-federalists and federalists. Would the government become too strong? Even would democracy function? The Constitution was ratified, but the battle for America's future was far from won. The divisions between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists would shape the political landscape for years to come. Then came a game changer, the Louisiana Purchase, 1803. In an instant, the U.S. doubled in size, gaining enormous new lands that held out the promise of resources, riches, and boundless opportunity. But expansion was not without consequences. The acquisition of vast Western territories raised critical questions. Who would control this land? How would it be governed? And most importantly, how would it shape the future of the young republic? The road to greatness remained uncertain. By 1815, America had once again faced off against Britain in the War of 1812, a conflict often called the nation's Second War of Independence. Though the war ended in a stalemate, it cemented America's sovereignty on the global stage. The successful defense of key cities, most notably the stunning victory in the Battle of New Orleans, fueled a wave of national pride. No longer was the U.S. a fragile experiment. It had proven its resilience against the world's strongest empire, securing its place as a force to be reckoned with. Yet, while the war boosted American confidence, it also exposed deep fractures at home. A far greater test loomed, not against foreign adversaries, but from within. As the country expanded westward, the dream of opportunity clashed violently with the reality of those who already lived on the land. The frontier, once painted as a land of boundless potential, became a battlefield of resistance and displacement. Indigenous tribes, who had fought alongside the British in hopes of halting American expansion, found themselves betrayed and abandoned. With no allies left to defend their lands, they faced relentless pressure from settlers and the U.S. government. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 marked the beginning of one of the darkest chapters in American history. Entire nations, including the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Creek, were forced from their ancestral homes and marched westward in what became known as the Trail of Tears. Thousands perished along the way, victims of disease, exposure, and exhaustion. Yet, despite the human cost, the hunger for expansion only intensified. The ideology of manifest destiny took hold, a belief that the United States was not only destined but divinely ordained to expand across the continent. It was no longer just about acquiring land, it was a national mission, a moral duty. By 1823, with its borders continuing to expand, the U.S. took an even bolder stance on the global stage. President James Monroe issued a declaration that would define American foreign policy for generations, the Monroe Doctrine. It was a warning to European powers. The Western Hemisphere was off limits to further colonization or interference. With this doctrine, the United States declared itself not just an independent nation, but a rising force in global affairs. But as America expanded its borders, new divisions emerged. The expansion that fueled national pride also deepened the cracks within the country. Would America be able to hold itself together as it grew? The country's economy started to diverge, with the industrialized North rapidly modernizing while the agricultural South hung on to slavery as its foundation. This conflict between slavery and freedom, between industrial development and plantation economies, would characterize the country's domestic conflicts for decades to come. The question was it possible for a nation based on the ideals of liberty and equality to reconcile such stark contradictions? Or was the nation careening towards unraveling? As America rode the turbulent seas of its expansion and development, its destiny as a world power was at stake. Would it be strong enough to overcome its internal conflicts and become greater? Or would these divisions destroy it before it could become a superpower? The United States had weathered its first tests: war, expansion, and division, but the biggest tests were yet to come. By the 1830s, the country had set new borders, but what had initially been a single vision of freedom was now bulging at the seams of its own conflicts. The ideals that had inspired the revolution now struggled with the growing needs of a new, complex nation. The seeds of revolution had been sown, but they would not be fought with machine guns and warplanes. Instead, they were fought in the factories, railroad yards, and with the rise of a new economy. The age of industry dawned, and an opportunity for America to cast off its old life and remake itself into an economic giant arose. But at what cost? As America entered the Industrial Revolution, progress came at a steep price. Factories sprang up, cities expanded, and wealth surged. But so did inequality, exploitation, and an economy increasingly dependent on a fractured labor force. Industry was booming, but beneath the surface, tensions were rising. Could the United States become the superpower it aspired to be? Or would it collapse under the pressure of its ambition? As fortunes were made, struggles intensified. The rise of industry brought opportunity, yet it also widened the gap between those who thrived and those who toiled in relentless conditions. With prosperity came ambition, but was ambition alone enough to secure America's place on the world stage?